Welcome to the Itinerant Preacher Podcast, the place where you can load up on spiritual food and motivation to help you down your road of life. We are in the middle of an 8-part series dedicated to the beatitudes, the beginning of Jesus' countercultural message on the mountain that begins in Matthew chapter 5. We illustrated in prior episodes that these beatitudes are progressive in the fact that one must be poor in spirit before they mourn their spiritual condition. This sorrow will lead to an attitude of meekness in which you will give your will over to God's sovereignty so much so that you will have an insatiable appetite for being right with God and man. To do that, you're going to have to show mercy, which is the beatitude that we're focusing on today. In its simplest form, mercy is compassion or forgiveness shown to someone who deserves punishment or harm by the person who has the power to do so. We used to play a game called Mercy when we were children. You would clasp hands and interlock fingers and then see who could bend the other person's wrist back until they could not take the pain anymore and called out mercy. The weaker person was at the whim of the stronger person, who did not have to let go just because you said the word, unless they really wanted to. But that was the game. If you exclaimed mercy, then you were begging for them to let go of you. The Greek word used in Matthew 5, verse 7, carries connotations of pity, empathy, and active goodwill. Mercy is not just leniency. It requires strength, intention, and a heart in tune to the suffering of others. The opposite of mercy would be justice. Everybody is all for justice, and it sounds like a great thing that justice should be served, except when it's you or someone you care about who is facing justice. Then you will change your tune and ask for mercy. Jesus was speaking to a people who knew very little about mercy in this Roman society, but who knew very much about justice or even injustice. As oppressed people, even the religious leaders of theirs, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, were known for their harsh, unbending ways. So this call for mercy had to have been a foreign concept for them. One of the classic examples of mercy versus justice can be found in the fictional novel by Victor Hugo, who was made into a Broadway play called Les Miserables. In this story, hardened criminal Jean Valjean, a felon who does 19 years in prison for stealing bread, gets out of prison and goes back to his criminal behavior. He then runs away and changes his identity, which breaks his parole. Inspector Javerts, a harsh, inflexible, unmerciful man, makes it his personal mission to hunt Valjean down, viewing him as an irredeemable criminal who must be brought to justice. Through the cat-and-mouse game of tracking Valjean and gathering information on him, he learns that Valjean has completely changed his life around and is responsible for many good deeds. Javert is beginning to question whether or not he should even bring Valjean in, or just let him go to live his new life when the inspector's undercover identity is discovered and he is taken prisoner himself during a student uprising. Valjean, who now has control of the situation and influence over the uprisers, instead of letting them kill or imprison this man who had been relentlessly pursuing him for all these years, Valjean saves his life and sets Javerts free. The inner turmoil finally breaks Inspector Javerts, who simply can't reconcile how a felon could treat him so mercifully, and he commits suicide by jumping into the river Seine. What would you do in that situation were you Jean Valjean? Would you show mercy to your pursuer and attacker? Or would you give him what he deserved, which in this case would be death? Or don't make it such an extreme example. Would you even show mercy to a friend who is holding a grudge against you? Or would you let go of a coworker's mistake when you could easily and justifiably berate them for it? Or your spouse who has continually disappointed you or let you down? Will you let them have it and keep rubbing their nose in the mistake, or will you show mercy? Mercy is very rarely convenient. It's going to cost you something to give it up. You're going to have to swallow pride or put in more effort because somebody did not do their part, or get rid of the vengeful attitude that you like hanging on to so much. So why would you even have such an attitude as a merciful attitude? There's only one good reason, and that is because you know that you have been on the receiving end of mercy yourself. And how much you're willing to give is typically how much you have received yourself. If you have a bowl of peppermint candies on your desk at work and your coworker comes by and asks you for one, of course you're going to give one away because they don't cost that much and you have plenty of them. But what if your coworker comes by and asks to borrow your personal laptop for a week because he lost his and he needs it for a project? Now it becomes a little more inconvenient because you only have one laptop and you need it, and you know he doesn't deserve yours. Or let's up it a little more. They wreck their vehicle in a single car drunk driving accident, and they ask you to borrow yours for a month until they can get a new vehicle. Whether or not you are going to have a merciful attitude, I dare say, is directly correlated with how much you have been forgiven or given and shown mercy yourself. If you haven't been in a position where you've had to ask for mercy very much, then you're more than likely not going to appreciate what it means for somebody to show mercy to you, and therefore you're not going to show it to others. Of course, there are exceptions to that general rule, and Jesus illustrates one of those examples in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. To modernize the story, an employee took out $10 million line of credit from his employer. Unable to make his payments, the employer was rightfully going to make him sell all of his assets and throw him into debtor's prison. But the man goes into his boss and begs and pleads for his freedom, begging that he stay out of jail because of his wife and children, and he promises to pay it back in full. Being moved with compassion and pity, the employer not only gave him more time, but he wiped away all of the debt that was owed completely. Instead of being grateful for the mercy shown to him, the man went home and immediately started calling in all the small debts that people owed him, demanding immediate payment. One of those included a small $200 loan he had given to a fellow worker. When the big boss heard about this travesty, he called in the ungrateful man, berating him for not showing the same mercy as he had received himself, and had the man ultimately thrown into prison until he could pay his debts. This parable illustrates the quote that Jesus made right after he taught these same disciples the model prayer in Matthew chapter 6. He said, "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." How much have you been shown mercy? Not just from others, but from God. I'll speak for myself, but you have to gauge how much He's shown to you. He's shown me mercy beyond my wildest imagination. He has never given me what I truly deserve. He's given me better deals than I could ever have even asked for on my own, and it has really cost me nothing. Of course, there's been consequences of actions, but the mercy I've received has been paid by someone else, since nothing is free. It was paid by Christ, and as such, I should have an attitude that I should give my mercy away for free as well, since it, in essence, costs very little in comparison. If you have trouble giving mercy, it's because you're self-righteous and don't truly believe that you've been given very much mercy yourself. Or it could be like you're like the unforgiving servant and might just have an evil, unforgiving heart. In either case, you need to do a true self-evaluation. Give yourself a heart check to put you on the right path. Take inspiration from characters in the Bible who showed great attitudes of mercy. One of the most prevalent ones we already looked at in an earlier podcast, and that's the story of Joseph and his brothers. Joseph had an absolute right to hold a grudge and to seek vengeance. This man had been sold by his brothers into slavery, and his entire young life had been spent in terrible conditions of imprisonment. As number 2 man in Egypt, he had every right to seek vengeance. but he did not. He showed mercy and compassion to his brothers of old. The most obvious example of mercy is exemplified by Jesus, who, in spite of all the abuse and indignities, asked for the Father to forgive them, for they know not what they do. Do not think that the promise given in the beatitude that they shall be shown mercy applies to other people who will show you mercy if you show them mercy. That's not the promise. You may or may not get that from others. The promise is that you will receive your just reward from your Father, who will show you mercy if you show others mercy. That should motivate you to treat others with compassion, even when they treat you the opposite. Thank you for tuning in today. If you have not yet shared this YouTube channel with your friends, please do so that they too can enjoy the Itinerant Preacher podcast. Until next time.